Good morning and welcome back. Today we are installing our well pump in our well. It's been about 3 weeks since our well was drilled, and yesterday the final part that we needed for our well pump install finally arrived. So we're going to load up all our tools, all our materials, and head on up to the build site to install the well pump. Alright, so before we start, let's just kick off with a quick disclaimer. We are not professionals at this. This is our first time installing a well pump. This is our own well pump that we're doing, and we're only doing it ourselves because we feel confident with the amount of research and support that we've had from our well driller and others. We feel confident that we can do this ourselves. This video is really just for entertainment and for you to get some ideas what it involves. If you are wanting to do something like this yourself, I thoroughly recommend you do your own research and find out whether that is something that you feel comfortable doing, and if not, hire a professional to do it. In our case, we spoke with the person that drilled our well. Normally, installing all of this stuff is something they would absolutely offer as a service, and they did offer that to us as well. They were very happy though for us to do it ourselves, so that he could get on to the next job. He did say though, if we ran into any problems, that we could just give him a call and he would help out, which I think was awesome. He also went through our plan and helped us pick out all of the right components and parts that we needed. So we feel pretty good about the plan that we have. So speaking of plan, let's talk through what we are actually going to do today. You can see the well shaft behind me, the wellhead behind me. That is the steel casing protruding about 4 feet or so above grade. We haven't finished our final grading, and when we have, the final top of that wellhead will be about 2.5 feet or so above final grade. That steel casing goes down 20 feet. And if you remember from our previous video, our well, when it was drilled, we got down to a depth of 160 feet. Now, as we were drilling, we hit water at about 60 or 70 feet, and we carried on going. And as we got deeper and deeper, we hit more and more seams. Along the way, we hit, I think, about 7 or 8 different seams. And by the time we got to about 120 feet, we were well in excess of 30 gallons a minute, which is way more water than we need. We did carry on to 160 feet just to see if we could get any more, but we didn't see any. So in our case, there's really no benefit to going below 120 feet with the well pump, because we have way more water than we need. And that's because the pump that we're going to be installing today is only a 10 gallon per minute pump. Now, the install we're going to do is a little bit odd. We are in Vermont, and this is very much a climate that freezes during winter. So we have installed a pitless adapter down on the side of the well shaft that is a few feet below grade and will be insulated. And that's how we're going to get the water out eventually. However, for that to happen, we need that pitless adapter to be connected to something else. And that something else will be a pipe inside the utility building, which we haven't built yet. So what we're going to be doing today is installing a well seal on the top and having it so that the well pump pipe comes out of the top just into a faucet. And we're actually going to have it so that we manually run the well pump just by plugging in a generator or power from our backboard when we want to run that. There'll be no pressure switch involved. This is just a temporary arrangement until we have that building built, probably sometime next year at this point. That does mean we need to consider winterization, and you'll see later some of the things that we're doing to winterize it. So the final idea for our well setup is that we're actually not going to have the well pump pushing water directly into the house via a pressure tank like you normally would. We're actually going to go into an intermediary tank, a 300 gallon holding tank that will be housed within the utility building. I will talk in a separate video about exactly why we're doing that, but for now there are some implications of that. The first is that because we have that tank as a buffer, we don't need a really high flow from our well. 10 gallons per minute from the well pump is more than enough, because we can always put a bigger boost pump the other side of that tank if we need a higher flow for the house and other buildings. So the pump that we're installing today is a Grunfoss. It is a 10 SQ05110. What that means is it's a 10 gallon per minute pump. It is a half horsepower pump, and it has a rated total dynamic head of about 110 feet. It can go deeper, but the flow rate drops off after that. It also runs, it's a 2-wire pump running at 115 volts, 120 volts. So this is not a 230 volt pump. This is a nice simple half horsepower 115 volt pump. That makes it really easy for us to run from our generator. One of the other things that we like is the Grunfoss SQ series pump have a number of nice features which I'll talk about later, but one of those is a slow start. This means when that pump starts running, it doesn't just suddenly like scream up to full power straight away. Instead, it slowly ramps up the power. Two implications of that are: one, we can much more easily run it on something like a generator, or if in future we want to run it through an inverter with a battery backup system, we can do that. Second is that when it starts up, it's going to put less torque on that pipe because it's not going to try and spin up to full speed straight away. So that's the pump that we're going to be installing today. We are going to be doing a number of fairly interesting things, I think, during this install. We are going to be putting this pump at about 100 feet below grade. And to make sure things don't freeze, we're actually going to be installing a drain valve. It's a Flomatic Model 70 series, about 9 feet below the top here, which puts it about 6 feet below grade. What this means is that the water will actually drain out back to that point, so that there will be no water in the line above there, and in future when we have the utility building, that whole line from the 300-gallon tank will actually drain back all the way into the well, meaning that underground pipe, which should be safe from frost, will actually have no water in it anyway, giving us an extra double layer of protection against that line freezing. The second thing that we're doing today, which is a bit unusual for something like this, we're going to be installing some sensors, specifically some temperature sensors, at different points in the well. I'm really intrigued to see how the temperature varies. We're going to be putting one on or just above the well pump itself. When the pump isn't running, this will give us a good idea of the ambient water temperature down there. When the pump is running, it'll help us to know, is the pump getting hot? Is the water around it getting hot? We can see trends over time and make sure that everything's working okay. We're going to be putting another temperature sensor on the drain valve, again, to make sure that is below the frost depth and that is draining the way it should be. Another sensor is going to go on the pitless adapter, which although we're not using for now, I want to keep an eye on the temperature there. So as we go through this wiring, you're going to see us wiring up some things that aren't typical for a normal well pump install. But for us, we are very keen to collect as much data as we can about this, so we're going to be installing those today. Well, anyway, that's the goal for what we're trying to achieve today. Let's get to it. So this is the pump that we're going to be installing. As you can see, that it is a 2-wire pump plus ground, and we have a bunch of wire. We've gone with a 10-gauge wire, which is way overkill for this size of well pump at this depth, but we'll make sure there's no voltage issues with this, and will also help to keep it cool, keep the wire cool. And if the worst should happen and something goes wrong and the pipe gets disconnected somehow from the well pump and it drops, this wire will be plenty strong enough to hoist the well pump back out with. But that is not the only precaution we're taking there. Again, we're not professionals at this, so we are taking a few backups that I'm sure professionals don't bother taking, but we felt better safe than sorry. So if you're not familiar with submersible well pumps like this one, let me talk you through how this works. This drops down the well. So this goes underwater, in our case, about 100 feet below. There are models that go a lot deeper than that, way over 500 feet even. It sits in the water, and it's going to pump the water through and up and out the top using a connection like that on the top. This will then be connected to our polypipe, which is what we're using for this install. So that is a 200-foot reel of 200 psi 1-inch polypipe or drop pipe. A lot of stuff you can buy these days is 160 psi. The newer stuff is 200 psi, and that's what we chose to go with there. So that will connect to the top and go all the way up to our well seal, which is this blue item here, and will come out of that hole in the middle. That is what actually supports the weight of the pump. It's going to hang down there in the water, held up by that pipe. So we need to make sure that all our fittings are really, really secure. In addition to that, it has these little hooks on the side. You can see these. These little hooks are where we can attach a safety rope. So we're going to be putting a safety rope on there as well. And then these wires are what provide power. So these wires will be connected to our other wire there with some heat splice and rubberized tape. And these will bring power all the way down to the well pump. It's not a big device, but this is what we're going to be installing, and this is what's going to be delivering us our fresh water. So the first thing I'm going to do is attach this barb fitting to the top of the pump here. Now this is an 1¼ inch MPT thread, female thread. So I've got an 1¼ inch thread on here, but this is going to a 1-inch barb. This barb is what's going to slide inside that polypipe and then get clamped on. I've used an extra long barb here. If I'd known about these earlier, I probably would have bought extra long ones for everything in here. Again, just out of an abundance of caution, but most of the other ones are all just standard length ones. In this case, it allows me to get 3 hose clamps around. So the little stainless steel hose clamps that we've got here. It'll allow me to get 3 of those around the length of this barb fitting. These barb fittings though on their own are crazy strong. When we were installing the pitless adapter over there, I just put the end of the polypipe only over one of the little barbs on here. I don't know if you can see those on the camera. It's got these sort of raised indentations on here. And even just with one barb fitting on there, it was really hard to get that off. We're going to use a blowtorch to heat up the polypipe before we put it on as well. Otherwise it's really hard to get it on. But once that's on, it would probably hold just on its own. The clamps that we're going to put on here, we're going to torque them down to the correct torque level. They will make sure this is absolutely never going anywhere. At least that's the plan. In terms of all these connections I'm making, I couldn't really find out a definitive answer to this, so I went with what I believe to be true, which is I'm trying to avoid using dissimilar metals in contact with one another. So you'll see that I've got a variety of brass and stainless steel fittings here. The idea here is, as much as possible, I'm going to have stainless steel in contact with other stainless steel parts and brass in contact with other brass parts. That way it should avoid any galvanic corrosion or interaction there. And then to make all these fittings, I am using a thread sealant and a thread tape. The best possible seal is a couple of threads of the tape followed by some of this special sealant designed for metal threads. That is particularly important on stainless steel, and especially if you are connecting it to brass, because it will stop the stainless steel from galling and binding up, and make sure that if we ever need to remove these connections, we can. So that's the plan there. So the first connection I want to make is to connect the 1¼ barb fitting onto the well pump, and then after that I'm going to assemble this little selection here, which I'll talk about in a second, a similar way. So let's get to it.
What's the tool you're using?
These are channel locks or adjustable pliers. That's just the easy way to do this with lots of different sizes of connectors here. I think this thread actually was tapered. Yeah, I think they're tapered threads on here. So that's got to the point now, even though there's some thread sticking out, that is properly tight in there. I don't think it's going to go any further. So I'm just going to try and wipe off some of the excess sealant here, but that should be a nice strong fitting. So I've been assembling this T, and the reason for that is this drain valve. This is actually the piece we've been waiting on. It was a factory order item, and somewhat frustratingly, it's not exactly the part we ordered. They do two variants of this, a 5 and a 10 PSI. We requested the 10, the 5 came in. For now, we can make it work. Once we do the utility building, we'll need to swap this out to the other one, but given we had to wait for this to arrive as a factory order item, we just decided to go ahead and use this. And that's what this T is for. So let me show you what this drain valve is. It's a very simple little device, and it's just going to screw into the side of the T like that. What will happen is we have the drop pipe coming up from the well, and then it continues up and round and out, whether that's to our temporary faucet on the well seal for now, or well cap, or it's off to the utility building. Once you turn a faucet off, all that water stays in the line because there's a check valve in the pump which will not let the water drop back down. So what this drain valve does is actually allows some of that water to drain out. So the water that's in this line, once this has a pressure of less than 5 psi, it will actually allow the water to drain back out. So when the pump is pushing it up, there's plenty of pressure in here, certainly after the slow start, and the pressure will build. This will close and all the water will then come out of the pipe. But when the pump turns off, the only pressure on here is the pressure of the water above. And the pressure caused by water is about 0.5 psi per foot. So for us, this will activate as long as there's less than 10 feet of water above it. So we need to install this 10 feet or less from the faucet, the lowest drain valve in the system. For us right now, that's going to be basically just on top of the well. So we're going to install this about 9 feet below there. Given it's about 3 feet to final grade, that puts this about 6 feet below the final grade, which should be a good layer of winterization to ensure that the line above the drop pipe doesn't contain any water. So I'm going to put some sealant on here and get this attached, and after that we're ready to start laying out some pipe. In terms of how this works, you can see at the end here, if I press in on that, there's a little spring, and that is the 5 psi spring that basically opens the valve inside and allows water to come out. We've got the drop pipe laid out, and if the sun would come out, that would help to warm it up a bit and soften it. We've also laid out the wire, the electrical wire, and the Cat6e Ethernet cable we're going to use to extend one of the sensors that we're putting down there. I've started now wiring the pump up, so the pump has these 3 wires, the hot, the neutral, and the ground. I've started with the ground here. You can see I've just put a heat shrink splice on. A lot of this equipment, I should say, we bought from a company called Aquascience online. We are not affiliated by them, not sponsored by them. We paid full price for everything here. They were really, really good to deal with, and almost everything you see here, apart from the pump itself and 1 or 2 other items, we bought through them. And I was really impressed. There's some things you'll see later we even rented from them as well. And they supply the heat splice, or heat shrink splice we're using here, and the wire. So we are going to be using both the heat shrinks over the top, which makes it waterproof. I'm also then going to wrap it in a layer of this special splice tape. This is like a rubberized tape and bonds to itself super, super strong and creates a waterproof seal as well. And I like to use that just as an extra kind of precaution on top of this heat shrink splice, just to make doubly sure that there's no air pockets or voids or anything that have stayed in there. That will do a really good job of binding it all nice and tight. So essentially, you peel the blue off and then it's stick underneath. So that's about, for reference, that's about 10 inches. So let's start with that. Okay. Now that we've got the electrical wires on the pump, the next thing to do is wire up some of these temperature sensors. These are the sensors that we're using here. These are called DS18B20 temperature sensors, and they are simple 1-wire sensors, 1 data wire anyway. And it's essentially, the sensor is inside here. This is a stainless steel cap that's epoxied on the end. And the wire on here is about 10 feet long, so obviously that's not deep enough to extend down to the bottom of the well. Each of these devices actually has an address, and that's how you can read the sensor, read the data off there, the temperature value, using an Arduino or something like that, which is how we're going to do it. So I made this little contraption here, and this just allows me to plug these 3 wires in really quickly to there, and on the little screen on here, it'll then tell me, it's too bright in the sunshine to see it unfortunately, but that allows me to then see the temperature that this is currently reporting, but also the address. So what I did a couple of days ago is I went through and I printed a load of labels with the address of each one of these sensors on, and so in the bag now, each of these sensors has its own address. We actually use a wiki where we were recording all of the information about the build, all our parts lists, our instructions, any reference materials that we found. We're also using it to document things as we go, so we know exactly what we've done. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is recording the address of each sensor and where it was placed. And that way later, when I build the Arduino side of things at the top of the well, I can call the sensor by its address and retrieve the temperature. We're actually going to put 2 sensors down at the bottom of the well. One of these we're going to fix somewhere on here. Which is kind of on the main housing of the well. I don't want to put it too low down. I don't want to sort of put it off down here too much because I'd have to tape this wire a few times. So I'm just going to place it somewhere around about here and tape it on, and then it will follow the other wires up for a bit. The second sensor down at the bottom, I'm actually going to raise above the well pump, somewhere around about here, about a foot or 2 above. And the idea there is that that will just tell us the ambient temperature down there most of the time, as well as seeing any convection that comes off the pump. Now, the way that I'm able to do that is because you can actually run multiple sensors like this on 1 wire. In our case, the Cat6 Ethernet cable down to the bottom. This is rated for use in wet conditions and direct burial, so that's what we're going to be using. I am going to try and protect the ends of this a little bit better. They're supposed to be waterproof, but obviously they're going to be under about 50 psi of pressure down there and constantly submerged. Well, we hope at least. So I'm going to put a little bit more heat shrink on here and some of that tape as well. Then I'm going to tape it onto there, and I'll get them spliced into this piece of network cable. Just really fiddly on these small wires. So what I'm doing, I have these real small stranded wires on the sensors themselves, which I'm then going to link to the solid wires in the Cat6E cable, twisted pairs. So what I'm trying to do is twist the sensor wires together first, just frankly to make my life a little bit easier. Normally I try to interweave all of these strands, but on such tiny wires it's really hard. And my hope is that this Cat6 cable will be high enough quality to work on this length of run. From what I can tell from my research, it should be. My little tester that I built, I'm not using the right size resistor on there, and so it's almost certainly not going to work at the end of this run anyway, but the final circuit should work. So these are the wires I need to splice. The orange is actually going to go to that way around, basically. So you can see how fiddly this is. They're going to join up like that, and these two wires on the side there will both go to ground. So that's my plan. Let's see if I can splice these tiny wires. And then you can have two sensors in the same place? Two sensors both running up this same way up. And so you can see the sensors are hanging at different heights. So one sensor at the bottom and one sensor here. Oh, I see. And they don't have to be on their own wires because they're addressable. Nice. So, okay, so the first one I'm going to do is this red one here. I'm doing stranded to solid core in the field is really hard. Just make my life a little bit easier. I've also tried to get some tiny heat shrink over the ends of these, which is making my life just that much harder. Just grab my needle nose pliers out of the bag, please. Yeah. Well, here it is. This is our Frankenstein sensor. We've got one sensor at the end, and then about, I don't know, 18 inches up, we've got another one, and then the splicers are all hidden inside there. I've used a combination of heat shrink and this splicing tape to try and give this the best possible chance of staying dry in there. As I say, the sensors themselves are waterproof. It's the splice I'm particularly concerned about, but I have read that some of these sensors sometimes fail and let water in, so this is just an extra layer of precaution. Alright, so we've got the first temperature sensor taped onto the end of the pump now. So the sensor is under here, pressed against the well housing, and we'll get all these wires taped together and the other sensor on soon. But the next thing I want to do is get the drop pipe installed on this barb fitting. For that, I'm using these gear clamps. These are stainless steel made by Boschart, I don't know how to pronounce it. You want to make sure when you look at these you get full stainless steel ones, including the screw. You can find them where the band is stainless steel, but this is not stainless. That will rust and give out. So you want to make sure that these are all stainless steel. In this case, you can see these are 300 stainless steel clamp with 300 stainless steel screw. And we're going to be installing 3 of those on this extended barb fitting. Just to show you, by the way, how sharp these barbs are. I hadn't realized it, but I don't know if you can see on my fingers here, it's actually cutting into my hands when I was holding them earlier. So this is probably a good time to wear gloves. I'm just going to try and not touch those barbs anymore, but it just shows you how much they dig into that drop pipe, that poly pipe. So we are going to be installing 3. I'm going to put these in an alternating pattern, so screws on alternating sides. I sort of read somewhere that was a good idea. I don't know how much of a difference that makes, but I can't see that it hurts. So I'm going to try that on here. We're also going to use a torque wrench to torque these down. The general guidance is just torque them down until you can't torque them anymore with a screwdriver type approach. We're not going to do that. We're going to be a little bit more scientific. This is a socket. It is a 5/16 socket that fits onto that screw bolt there, rather than the flathead screw approach. Boschart recommends torquing their clamps down to 60 inch-pounds. So I have a small torque wrench here that I pull out occasionally, and I have that set to 60 pounds, 60 inch-pounds here. And so that's what we're going to be using to tighten all of these clamps. If you don't tighten them enough, obviously they don't fully do their job. If you tighten them too much, they can fall apart, they'll break, basically over torque them. Boschart recommends 60. They do test them to way higher than that though. Before we put the drop pipe on, the last thing we want to do is heat it up. So that way, when it's hot, it should slide on there a little bit more easily. And because this is, I mean, that's a good 3 inches or more of barb fitting there, we do want to make sure that the pipe is warm, otherwise it's going to be hard to get on. So I've got a blowtorch, let's get it heated up. Okay, let's try that. Push. Can you move back a bit? I'm on a rock here. Thank you. Almost there.
We want.
Okay.
Almost there. Okay.
Yep, we're bottomed out. Okay.
Oh, that's definitely a two-person job.
Yeah, especially on that long barb fitting. So I'm going to put the clamps on like this. I'm going to put them on the back side from the wires, just so that the screws never sort of contact that and damage it. So you probably saw that was pretty hard to get that on there. That was two-person operation, pushing those two ends together. On a shorter length, you can kind of twist them a little bit to get them on. On a pipe this long, it's really hard to do that with the pump and things. So two of us were able to get those mated together. These three clamps are now being tightened to 60 inch-pounds. And yeah, that connection is going absolutely nowhere. I feel really, really confident in that. I did put the clamps on the back side versus the wires, so there's no chance there of any damage to the wires by touching anything sharp around the ends of the bands. So that's this end done. At the other end, we need to connect it to the drain valve and then the pipe beyond that. But for now, I want to keep working on this end of the pipe. There's a few things we need to do here. The first is we want to get the electrical wires taped on here so that they are out of the way and not going to cause any interference. So we're going to electrical tape that all the way down to this splice point. We then have a torque arrestor and a cable guide to go on, not to mention the other temperature sensor that I'm just about standing on that will be in here as well. So we're going to start taping this stuff up and get that on really nice and neat and tidy. So the next thing we're installing is this device here. This is a torque arrestor. And the way it works, it clamps over the pipe and then we squeeze it down like that so it bulges out. And we're going to expand it so it's basically just about the same as the inner diameter of the well casing. This is made of rubber, and what this will do is when the pump spins up, if the pump tries to spin because of the torque caused by the motor, this will basically spin against the sides of the well and stop the pump from spinning, and hence stopping any damage to the pump or higher up or anything else. So comes in two halves, and you mate the two halves over the pipe, put a cable clamp on one end, squeeze it to the right dimensions, and then put a cable clamp on the other end, securing it in place. Now, we've already put the wires on, and I think probably we should have put the wires going outside of this. They, I think, should have gone in this gap basically up the side. But I think it's going to be fine. There's actually a really nice space. It needs to be installed 18 to 24 inches above the well pump, which in our case really conveniently puts it between our two splice joints, just on the bare wires in there. And I don't think there's going to be any harm in squeezing those. If anything, it'll just secure them in place. A little higher up, we are going to get onto the other splice that's just there, but I think we can probably just about get away with that. I think we'll just about clear it on the other end as well. So I guess this is one of the things you learn when you're doing it for the first time. But at this point, it's not worth trying to take all that electrical tape off. There's more risk of us damaging something trying to get all that off than there is just working around it now. So according to the instructions, what it says is you want this to be on the outside of the wires in case this shifts, and then it could cut the wires underneath. Yeah, it could. It really could. Okay, I think we have to take it all off.
Okay.
Okay, so we changed our mind. We got the torque arrestor on there, and basically, according to Boschart, the risk of it being over the cables is that if that clamp shifts, it could damage the wire underneath. So they recommend having the cable and the rope installed afterwards and go through the gaps in there. We're going to do that. We got the cable clamp on, we thought it was going to be okay, didn't feel comfortable with it, and honestly, like, of all the mistakes that we can make, if all it costs is a bit of tape to undo, I think it's one worth rectifying at this point rather than risking it. So we are now taking the tape off just down to this section. This bottom section can stay, and then we'll retape it again once the torque arrestor is in place. So above the torque arrestor on there, we have installed the next little gadget, and this is called a snap-in cable guide. And so it opens up like that, and it clamps over the pipe, and then it has these two holes here. One is for the wires, and one is for the safety rope. And the purpose of this is really to stop them hitting the wall of the well. That's when a lot of the damage can occur in wells, is when the wires and things are allowed to rub against the side of the well casing or the well shaft, especially if it's spinning, which hopefully the torque arrestor is designed to stop. But these will actually hold those wires in place next to the drop pipe. We're going to tape these wires every 20 feet, every 2 to 3 feet anyway. These cable guides will install about every 20 feet or so. And essentially what they'll do is they'll stop the pipe itself getting near the sides of the well. So it's great taping the wires to the drop pipe, but the drop pipe itself can still move unless you install something like this. While Diana is taping the wires onto the drop pipe every 2 or 3 feet, I've turned my attention to the top of the well. So you may remember from earlier we said that about 9 feet down from the top of the well we are going to have that drain valve. Well, I have that installed on the end of a 9-foot section. So this is the top piece of the well, if you like. The other end is literally the top. It is the well seal, the well cap. So what we have here is the well seal we're going to be using. This is a split piece design. It's the Campbell SUB6X1 is specifically the model number we're using. And the way that this works is this has a hole in the center, and the well pipe will actually come up from the bottom there through that hole and stick out the top. And on the top of the well, we will then install this brass barb elbow fitting. This will go into the polypipe and be clamped on. And essentially, that elbow, if you look on here, with the clamps, won't be able to drop back through the hole, and these bolts will tighten all that up. And there's a rubber, sort of big rubber washer, if you like, in the middle here, that as you tighten these bolts will squeeze that in. And it's that elbow not being able to drop back through there, or specifically it'll sit above there, and the clamps not being able to drop back through there, that is what holds up this entire well pump assembly. So this join has to be really, really strong. It has the full weight of everything on top. This then gives us a threaded fitting on the top of the well cap, the well seal, which is what we'll then use for all our connections from then on. There are 2 other holes in this fitting here. this one here, this is where the electrical wires will come up and through. And in our case, I think we're going to use this for the safety rope as well. The safety rope, when we do the final well seal next year, using the pitless adapter and everything, the safety rope will actually tie off to a rope hanger that goes underneath. That is not compatible with this particular well seal here. So for the time being, I'm just going to pull it up and probably through the same path as the electrical conduit. The other fitting it has here is a 1/2 inch fitting, and this is for an air vent. So what you don't want to happen is the well seal to be completely sealed, because then when it pumps, it's got to pull the air in from somewhere. And what it'll do is actually, one, it'll make the pump work a lot harder, but two, it'll try and pull air in through the rock and through any little area it can. And that backfilling from inside the well can bring a load of sediment and dirt and things into there, as well as making the pump work harder. So that's not what we want. So we have a vent that goes on the top that allows the pump to breathe. So I'm going to be working on this. I've already done that end. I just need to do this end now and get this barb fitting installed. Most important thing, don't forget to put the clamps on before you put the fitting on, otherwise you're really going to regret it. And actually in this case, what I almost forgot there was the most important thing. This has to go on first. Have to get the right way around. This is the bottom. So that's going to come through there and down onto the end. Now I can put my 2 clamps on there, and now I can heat this up and get my barb fitting installed. Diana, can I have your help for a second? I'm calling in the help. This is really tight, this one. Okay, so if you can, probably from this side, you need to push this down this way as much as possible. I think that's as tight as it's getting. Okay. As with all of these clamps, just get it snugged into position, kind of where I want it, and then tighten them up with the torque wrench afterwards. And then if I slide this back to the top, you can see now how this works. This fitting can no longer slide through that hole, and actually when the bolts are done up here and it tightens this together, it won't even sit quite that low. I'll actually bring it up another 1/2 inch or so, so it's past the barb flare. And yeah, that will be the top of our well. We've decided we're going to attach a safety rope to the well pump as well. A lot of installers won't do this nowadays. We decided it's probably a good backup just in case we've done anything wrong elsewhere. It's just one other layer of protection that we have on the pump. The pump has a little hook to attach the safety rope to. We're using a 1/4 inch braided poly rope. It's specifically designed for this application. I have secured it to this hook using a figure 8 knot, tied off with a double fisherman's knot or bend as a stopper, and so that should hold it in place. This rope though is super slippery, so that knot kind of wants to slip. So I'm going to tie some, or tape some electrical tape around that in a figure 8 and should lock that in place. We're actually going to use this going through a carabiner. You'll see that in a little while as we lower the pump down. Meanwhile, Diana's almost finished the taping on the main section. So she has finished the taping on the main section. So in a minute, we'll bring that round and get this piece with the drain valve installed on the end and get the wire and things taped on there as well. I'm taping this up not just to stop it coming undone, but also to protect it from the cable clamps that are just here. Particularly this one has a sharp edge on there, and my hope is that this tape will protect it. Along with the temperature sensors that we installed down at the bottom of the well, we've also put one here on the drain valve. We've done it exact same way. We have put some heat shrink around it to begin with, put some of the splicing tape, and then done a splice again with heat shrink and splicing tape into another piece of the Cat 6E. And that is what we have coming off here behind me. So these two pieces of Cat 6 are going to bring up the signals from the two sets of sensors. And that's what will let us keep an eye on the temperature down the well. All right, the time has come where we're ready to just about lower the well pump down inside the well shaft. The last thing that we do before we drop it in entirely is, do you remember that torque arrestor that we installed earlier? We got it to a pretty good approximation of the inside diameter here. We want to check that. It should be a fairly snug fit. So we're going to check that up here in the casing. Hopefully the casing is the exact same diameter as the well shaft further down. We'll soon find out 20 feet later if it's not. So we're just going to lower that in now. There are some sharp edges on here, so we're just going to try and do that really carefully. Now, when it comes to actually lowering the well pump in a minute, we do have a special little tool. So we actually rented this from Aquascience. Again, no affiliation there. This is a roller, basically, and so it mounts kind of like that and screws in place on the side of the well shaft. And basically means that those sharp edges on the steel casing won't just scrape against our wire and well pipe, and it'll have a smooth run down. As we go, we've marked with some blue ribbon on the pipe where we want to install the cable guides every 20 feet. We did that rather than having them drag all across the ground. We'll just slip them on as they get here, which means that we need to be able to stop the pump periodically. I don't think it's going to be too heavy to drop it down, but I don't want to be wrong on that one. So with that in mind, we've got this assembly that you can see above me here. So what we've got is the, it's twisted there. We've got the well pump here on its, on a carabiner on the safety rope. So as the well pump goes down, this safety rope will just feed up. But just by pulling on that, I can really lock off the well pump. And this is attached just up to the tractor. So it should be nice and stable up there. It's not going anywhere. And that gives us the ability to pretty quickly tie this off if we need to stop the well pump falling anymore. So this is the plan. First thing though, let's get the torque arrestor in there and make sure it's a good fit. That's right. So that is a snug fit. And that's going to drop down. Yeah, I think that's good, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay.
It is there. Okay. Are we ready to drop?
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's just get that past the roller.
Rope.
It's effective, isn't it?
Yeah.
water.
That's quite deep then.
Yeah, 30 feet.
Oh, I thought it was like 15 feet.
Yeah. Can you also hit water there? I think it's about 15 feet. I think it's the things thudding that we can hear. Okay, so let's come a little bit further in. Okay, then I'm going to take this off.
Yeah.
And I want to try and keep the pipe and the cables away from the edge of this.
Yep.
Either that, so pull down on that.
Yep.
So you don't need to pull this tight. Let that come through. Okay. So I'm going to lift this out of the way. Okay.
Okay.
And then we're going to come. You're going to let go of that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This here that I'm attaching is the vent. It's just a 4-inch PVC vent, nothing super fancy. Just screws into that 1/2-inch vent hole and allows air into the well when the pump runs without letting insects and dust and debris and water and things get in there. So that just goes in there. So on the side here, we're going to have a little faucet. There's a reducing bushing and a faucet, and that's how we're going to connect the hose that we use. We will have a backflow preventer on the hose, but we can't leave that on all the time because that is essentially a one-way valve. And if that's in place, it will not let the drain valve lower down actually drain the liquid back out. So we'll actually have that connected to the hose, not the faucet. And that way, after we've used the faucet, we'll disconnect the hose, leave the faucet open for a while, and that will allow the water in that top 9 feet to drain back. But take a look at this. We have a well pump installed, 110 feet below our feet, I guess.
Before the top.
110 feet below here, so 105-ish feet below our feet. There is now a well pump connected to these wires with some temperature sensors and a safety rope. Like I said earlier, the safety rope is coming out of here for now. Once we have the final well cap installed rather than this well seal, that actually has a hanger that will hang on the top here, and this safety rope will be tied inside. For now, we've just brought that out and we can just tie that off somewhere inside the electrical system as well. And yeah. So obviously the wires here are way too long. That was deliberate. We just gave ourselves plenty of excess so that we didn't come up short. We'll cut these down in the near future to a much more manageable size. But for now, it's there.
So next up, we'll be installing the electrical to be able to run from generator.
Correct. So much like we have a temporary install here of the actual well head, the water, the plumbing side of things, we're going to have a temporary install of the electrical as well. Long-term conduit running around here and into the building, but short-term we're just going to have a post on the back here with an inlet receptacle that we can plug a 20 amp or 15 amp cord from a generator or from our backboard into, and that will, with a little switch, allow us to run our pump.
And then we'll flush it out for a little while, and then we'll do testing for the water, and then we'll know whether it's safe to drink.
Exactly. So yeah, exciting times. So I do hope you enjoyed this video, watching how we installed our well on our property here in Vermont. And if you do, make sure to subscribe and follow us along on our journey as we build our dream home here in Vermont.